Hello Lisbon. Thank you very much for having me. It's my first time here. It's lovely. So I'm Claire. I'm here to talk about connected homes. So let's hope this is working as well. Too many technical issues. There we go. Yay. Okay. So I'm the service design manager for a company called alertme.com, who you probably haven't heard of for a number of reasons. But we make a connected home platform, which I'll explain a bit more about in a minute. Now, you may not have heard of us, but Wired nominated us their #1 startup in the UK last year, so we are kind of going. There are about 80 of us, which doesn't sound very startup-y, but for one reason and another, we still seem to be classed in that space. And one reason that you may not have heard of us is that people don't really buy things from AlertMe anymore. We are B2B, which means that we sell things to other businesses who then sell them on to their end customers. And at the moment, that means people like British Gas in the UK, Lowe's, who are like a big DIY retailer in the US, and Ascent, who are an energy company in the Netherlands. So you can buy things from those companies that have their brand on them, but ultimately come from us. I should point out that I tend to get quite ranty, so things I say will be my opinions and not necessarily those of all of my colleagues. Also, some of the designs that I'm going to be showing you today were produced before I joined the company, so I can't necessarily take credit for some of the things I'm going to show you. So what is this connected home business kind of all about? Well, essentially, it's about embedding computing in everyday objects, in things you would find in the home, and connecting them up to the internet to give you control of them. So I'll show you a few examples of AlertMe type stuff just to give you a flavour of this. We'll look at some more later. But essentially, there's things like, one of the big things is understanding energy usage, and this can be through smart meters, can be gas and electricity. The stuff I'm showing you here is energy monitoring. This is electricity monitoring. So there's a clamp that attaches to your electricity meter. There are smart plugs that you can use to track how much an individual appliance is using. And you can view all of this stuff on web and mobile interfaces and what we call in-home displays that are little things that sit on the counter. Then there's controlling your heating, which is another big thing, because heating is the thing certainly in the UK, is the thing that uses most of our energy in the home. So this is an example of something we've produced for British Gas in the UK. It's called a remote heating controller. The thermostat that sits on the wall is not particularly pretty, but it looks pretty much like a standard thermostat. That connects to the internet, and then you can control that through web and mobile interfaces. Am I being lost on this mic? Because it sounds like it's. Let's go over here, see if that works better. Okay, cool. And so finally, one of the other big areas is home security, and this is stuff like kind of burglar alarms, cameras, that kind of stuff. So that includes things like sensors for tracking whether somebody's in the house, whether someone's opened a window or a door, cameras, key fobs you can use to set the alarm to sort of tell you who's in and out of the house. And again, there are web and mobile interfaces to this. And finally, this is an example of the interface that we have for the product in the US. And this shows you what happens when you put all of these things together. So essentially, all this stuff is running on a single software platform. It can be accessed through a single UI. And there's some other things on here as well that we do, particularly in the US, which is stuff like door locks that you can open and close with your phone, sort of lighting, kind of cooling as well as heating. So there's kind of a lot of stuff going on here, and all of these things potentially can interact with each other. And when I start talking about this stuff, quite often this kind of look passes over people's faces, and they go, oh yeah, home automation. And there's a kind of subtext to that reaction, which is, this stuff has been around for ages, hasn't it? And it never really took off. And the thing is that kind of basically they're right. This is an advert for something called X10 Powerhouse. Now the X10 was a command sort of type protocol that ran over the electrical power lines in your house. That was invented back in 1975. This system here is from 1986, and this was something that allowed you to control various things in your home from your Commodore 64, if anyone else is old enough to remember those. And so what this did was allowed you to monitor appliance usage, turn things on and off, turn the lights on and off, control the heating, control security systems, and you could do all of that over the telephone as well, which is basically exactly the same kind of stuff we're doing now. So how come this stuff has been around for 40 odd years and and we're not all using it? And part of the problem was that you kind of generally had to be rich to install this stuff. A typical setup would cost you maybe about $20,000. And you not only had to be rich, you also really had to be fairly geeky, because if you didn't want to spend $20,000, you had to roll your own. Even if you did spend $20,000, it probably went wrong quite a lot. So you kind of had to be, I've met a number of people who've set up X10 systems in their own homes, who were super technical, super knowledgeable, and said, yeah, you know what, after a while, I just kind of turned it off because it wasn't really working for me. So basically, not understandably, the sort of normal people, well, the rest of us who were not technical or rich, kind of looked at this stuff, if we'd even heard of it, and said, you know what, I managed to turn my own lights on and off, I can turn my heating on and off, show me the benefit that justifies all of this cost and effort. But I think some things are kind of starting to change now, and to borrow a phrase from Matt Jones, of Berg and now of Google, who many of you may have heard of, I think one of the things that's changing is we now have this sort of, instead of this big top-down concept of I must have the smart home, we're starting to see little bits of technology, little bits of connectivity and intelligence creeping into sort of everyday objects. And these kind of are these sort of bite-sized chunks of little products that just make a little bit more sense because they're a bit cleverer and they're a little bit more connected than they were. So here we've got the Withings video baby monitor, the Belkin Wemo smart plug, which you can turn on and off from a mobile, the Nest thermostat, which is a lovely piece of hardware. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. And the Philips Hue light bulbs, which again you can control from a smartphone app and change the colour and turn them on and off. And I think the other thing that's really changing is that we now have this idea, this kind of metaphor for remote control for your life, which is not a phrase I came up with. I forget who first used it, but we are used to wandering around with one of these things. We're used to being able to connect with the people and the things in our lives that are important to us without having to sit down in front of a Commodore 64. And this makes it really much more meaningful to be able to sort of say, oh, I left the heating on, I've forgotten about it, and to be able to change that from wherever you are. And the thing is that there have been, for a long time, many technical challenges in getting all of this stuff to work together. I'm not going to pretend that those have gone away. A lot of progress is being made in that area. But one of the key challenges we're seeing now is that the technology is getting cheaper. Companies are starting to bring things out for the mass market. But actually understanding and delivering what the mass market really needs from this is a massive, massive challenge, which obviously is something that UX needs to think about. Now, there are a lot of challenges in this space. Homes are complicated social contexts. There's an awful lot that goes on there. I'm just going to talk about a few of them here. And I think the first one, really, and this is a very big one, is that homes are quite personal contexts, and a lot of the systems that we've seen don't really feel very much like home. So this is AT&T Digital Life. Last time I showed this at a talk, I met somebody who'd worked on it, which was kind of terribly embarrassing. There are smart people working on this, but they are somewhat constrained by the technology, I should point out. So, and this sort of doesn't really kind of superficially looks okay. And then you start to read it, and you say, okay, bedroom 1, outlet power indoor on. What is that? I don't know. I mean, to me, as a Brit, the word outlet kind of means nothing. But, and I appreciate it probably means a bit more to an American audience. But it's, what is this thing? I mean, this might very well be a bedroom light, but, this is not sort of terminology that we would use ourselves. This is another system called Greenwave Reality. Now, it's not as pretty as AT&T, but it does. Things have names that sort of map to the kinds of names that we would use for them. So there's a game console, there's a floor lamp, there's a Blu-ray. These are recognizable things that you would have in your living room. But then you see this interface, this one up here on the right, and it says, living room, choose device in port 3 of 6. Whose living room has ports? Who knows what this is? Maybe you know what this is if you own the system, but it's kind of like, it's not really, this is not really language that we use. And finally, I'm going to be a bit mean and pick on one from a rather small company just because it's really quite a great example of this. This is Home Automation Limited, who make a system called HAL, which is named after a computer that went mad and tried to kill people, which is, that's, brilliant. Yeah, all right, that's exactly what I want in my home. And this looks like some kind of dodgy old Visual Basic type programming interface. So we have conditions and actions, and you can modify them and add them, and we have modes and schedules and stuff. What's really going on here is that someone's setting it up so that when they turn the bathroom light off and leave the room, the music that was routed through the bathroom speakers is now being stopped, which is kind of a plausible thing to do. But in order to do that, you have to deal with this kind of interface, and this is not something that your granny's going to use. I wonder if anybody can spot the design metaphor that's sort of underpinning all of this. I think it's a computer. And I also think it's a rather old and kind of like crappy, dodgy computer. In the spirit of fairness, this is an old Alert Me interface to point out that it does many of the same things. And there's a series of kind of underlying assumptions that the designers of these systems have made, which is that there's it has users and peripheral devices. This is all computery stuff. Those users have access permissions to do various things, and at any point they are in or out of the house. So that's very much like being logged in or out of a computer system. If there are mobile devices, then the presence of a mobile device indicates that that user is there. So there's a one-to-one mapping between the devices and the people. And finally, there's an assumption that the user's goal is to sort of program the home for optimal efficiency. Okay. And this is where I really start to have problems with it, because I'm not very good at being optimally efficient at home. I like to think that home is the one place where I can get away without being optimally efficient. And a lot of the people I talk to in user research kind of basically feel the same. Now this screenshot is from RWE Smart Home demo. So I'm not sure how well this maps to the actual interface, but it's something that's on their website. This is a German system. It's fairly typical in terms of the kinds of things it offers you. And it shows an example of something that a lot of smart home type systems have, which is modes, which I think is really a problem. And this particular one is a romantic mode. The idea of a mode is that you press a button and a single button and a bunch of things happen to get your home into a particular state. And so what happens in this particular one is that the lights are dimmed and the heating is turned up so that it's presumably comfortable if you've taken some of your clothes off. Let's not think about that too much. I don't know, maybe there's some Barry White playing or something anyway, but it's, this is a thing that they think people need. And I would argue that there may well be a market for that. Perhaps it's not as big as they think it is, because if you met a nice person and things were going well and you went back to their house and they went, hey, I have configured my home for romance, would you go, well, hey, this person is cool and whatever, or would you just kind of run away, It's like, well, I think some of us would run away, wouldn't we? And the problem with all of this stuff is that it's really kind of taking this engineering approach, engineering model and trying to apply it to how people behave, and most of us don't really think like that. Anybody who works in UX knows that people are genuinely quite rubbish at predicting what they might need in the future. That's why we don't just go out and do focus groups and go, hey, what would you like to be using in the next 5 years? They're generally a little bit disorganized as well. So they have routines, but day to day there are exceptions and little things that crop up to break those. We have lots of contradictions and exceptions in life to our rules. So you might say that you don't normally let the kids watch that much TV, but what, today they're ill or it's raining and you're going to make an exception, it's fine. People lend devices to each other, again, particularly children. It's like give them the iPhone and shut them up for half an hour. And with the rules that we have about sort of who's allowed to do what in the home are generally kind of a bit flexible because we haven't had to write them down anywhere, and sometimes we bend them. And sometimes, we ought to do the washing up, but you know what, we'll just leave it a bit longer and it's not the end of the world. So, and there's one story that I've heard a number of times from research and I really like, and it's this idea that presence, which is you can track who is in and who is out of the house at any point and make assumptions about the things that they will and won't do, sort of breaks down when you have teenagers. And so people say, well, I can see that this system will tell me who is in and who is out, but the thing is that sometimes my teenagers are physically in the house, but they're not actually kind of present in a psychological sense. So you shouldn't set the burglar alarm, and you should make sure that the heating is on. But you can't assume that they're going to answer the doorbell or the phone or anything like that. So it's this kind of, these sort of grey areas. This computer thing just kind of what makes my head boggle, really, because we have a metaphor for a home. We've had a metaphor for homes for thousands, if not millions of years, and it's home, and this is my one, and it's somewhere that it's my refuge from the world, and it's not somewhere that I want to feel out of control or have to log into or worry that it's going to crash or need debugging and that kind of stuff. So I think we really have to get past this computer thing. And some of the systems that are starting to come out now, like Belkin Wemo, I think there's a lot of excitement about them. They tend to get lots of funding on Kickstarter. They get lots of shouts on the tech blogs, and they're really cool. But I think this is still basically the same kind of model that's being better designed. So if you look at this is some of the configuration screens from the Wemo iPhone app. This is not necessarily this is still early adopter kit. This is still something where you have to define your own problem and then you have to program the system to deliver it. It's just more nicely implemented. And I think this is the difference between something that I would think of as being a tool and something that I think of as being a product. Okay, so the second challenge is that a connected home kind of makes lots of data visible that perhaps previously wasn't visible. And sometimes this has social consequences. So if you think about it, a home is quite a complicated social context in many cases. So there's often more than one person living in one. There are dynamics between them. And some of those things go smoothly. Sometimes they're a bit tense. Sometimes it's all a bit unspoken. People may want different things. And sometimes we kind of rub along with each other much better by the fact that we don't necessarily know what everybody else is up to all the time. Now, these are some screenshots from I have a Withings bathroom scale. And these are some screenshots I took from the iPhone app of weight measurements that it didn't recognize. And so it's things that it knows when I get on the scales, it knows it's me, it knows when it sees my partner. But these are the bits, the data points it didn't know what to do with. And I learned a couple of things from this, from looking at the time of use and making some approximate guesses at how much things weigh. First of all, my cat sits on the scales. You may notice that my cat is slightly overweight. Secondly, my cleaner is watching her weight. So these are Wednesday and Thursday afternoon readings. There's no one else in on a Wednesday or Thursday afternoon. And neither my partner or I are that thin. So anyway, this is innocuous stuff. I don't care about the cat. I'm very happy for the cleaner to use the scales if she wants to. But neither of these people/beings has any idea that I know this. And if you also have data from things like energy usage, from things like energy monitoring, and things like kind of who set the alarm, who came in and out, you can figure out things like who's in, who's out, who keeps turning the heating up all the time, who's on the Xbox at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then when people have different ideas about how things should be, you make this stuff visible, and suddenly, tension. One of the ones we hear about a lot is around energy monitoring. And typically, you have one person in the house who says, we must track how much energy we're using, we're spending too much money, or I'm concerned about the environment, that kind of thing. And so they kind of take ownership of the energy monitoring in the bill. And then it's not always the same person as the one who's using the appliances in the home. And tumble dryers are sort of particularly good fun because tumble dryers use an awful lot of electricity. It's something that some people see as being an essential labour-saving device, and other people see as being a little bit kind of discretionary. We could hang the washing out, we could do something else. And so what happens will be that the person with the energy monitor says, my God, this tumble dryer is costing us loads of money, it's using loads of electricity, we must not use this thing, or we must use it less. And the person who uses the tumble dryer says, when was the last time you did the washing? So the third challenge is that a lot of the stuff that happens in the home is boring, and that's good. Maybe mundane is a better word. There's a lot of kind of relatively boring day-to-day shit we all have to get done, and quite a lot of it happens in the home. And we really don't want to have to think too hard about it. So we develop routines to kind of get through things like brushing your teeth and getting the kids to school in the morning, doing the washing, so that you don't have to think about all the details of it all the time. And when something goes wrong, like when one of the kids is ill or the electricity's gone off or something, then you deal with it. Then you allocate attention to it. But you don't, most of the time you get away with it without saving your attention, without thinking too hard, so that you can save your attention for important things or for more interesting stuff. The problem is that the designers of some of these systems seem to be, maybe this is, I think sometimes this is a commercial thing, that we must get our product in front of people, we must make it really exciting. And actually they try to kind of demand too much attention. Now this is my washing machine. I don't know if anyone here works for Bosch. If you do, it does lots of lovely things, intelligent things to get clothes clean. That's great, I'm happy with that. What I'm not happy with is the fact is how needy it is. So when it's finished to load, it beeps, somewhat aggressively. And it doesn't stop. It keeps going because it has finished doing the washing and now it is your turn and you must take it out. Because this is a disaster. And it's not connected to the internet. I'm cheating slightly by including this, but it has no manners, and I don't want it connected to the internet until it blinking well learns some, because that's an appropriate behavior pattern from a burglar alarm. That's something that must have your attention right now, and this does not need my attention right now. If the washing doesn't come out for an hour or for 8 hours, it's really not a disaster. And if you imagine that you had a load of these really individualistic attention-seeking devices kind of all shouting for your attention all the time, that's just going to be complete bedlam. You're not going to want that. You're going to run away. You're going to leave your house and flee to the other side of the world. And that's what's wrong with, one of the things that's wrong with this kind of model of, the very technical connected home, is it demands attention. It demands you to think about what must happen when I leave the bathroom. What must happen when I turn the TV off. To a certain extent, that's okay. But to another extent, this is really just kind of, you're making me think really hard about the stuff I do every day, and I'm just not going to bother. Now this is an example. This is a prototype of an intelligent heating system made by a company called Wattbox, which AlertMe acquired a couple of years ago. It's not quite in production yet, but it is in trial. And Wattbox is a heating controller. What it does is monitor the electrical activity in your home. So it looks at whether you're using any electricity above the base load, and base load being the level that the house consumes all the time, so things like the fridge that run all the time. If you're using electricity, if you're up and about, if you're in the home and you're up and about, there's a good chance that you've probably got something electrical on. So it uses that to figure out when people need heating, and it learns from that. And the instructions are basically turn it on and ignore it. I would argue that it's actually somewhat smarter than Nest, but we can get into that one. We can get into that one later. But this is just an example of something that is a better heating controller, or it's trying to be a better heating controller. It's trying to take the effort from you away of worrying about something really boring, which is heating. And so the final challenge I want to talk about today is that we actually don't understand how to use half the stuff in our homes anyway. And when you start piling more technology into some of the home some of the home kit, you realise that sometimes you're just making the problem worse. Now this is a ring-tailed lemur, and it comes from Madagascar, where it's nice and warm. And most of us understand how well our home heating, or possibly in any of you from Portugal, you may have cooling as well, which is we don't need that in the UK. But the kind of process of making your house a comfortable temperature is something people generally don't understand. And this guy probably knows about as much about it as you do. And the reason I mentioned the lemurs, there was a lovely story in the news last year about some lemurs in a zoo in southwest England who were given a heater to get them through a cold winter. And they learnt how to break into the cage where the heater was kept and crank up the thermostat. So the keepers were setting it at a temperature they thought would be nice and sort of Madagascar-like. And these guys are sort of getting in and going, and then lying on the heater and, lovely. Which is, it's quite intelligent, it's kind of cute. But it was a thermostat. And this is exactly what people do. So I've done a certain amount of years of research into heating behaviour. And people say things like, oh yeah, when it gets cold, you need to turn the thermostat up. It's a thermostat. It's not a valve. You don't turn it, it's not like a volume control where you turn it up and you get more heat. It's a switch and it has a set point, and what you're doing is controlling the set point of that. So actually, the way you really use a thermostat is you pick the temperature that you want to be at that's comfortable for you, and then when it drops below that or it drops above that, if you're cooling, then the system will kick in to maintain that for you. So you don't really need to do this at all. Now, I met this, I was kind of feeling slightly despondent about all of this stuff. We were trying to design a heating system that allows people to take control of their heating. You know, it turned out it's like people don't understand this. Do we make something that sort of covers up their flaky mental model, or do we just try and explain it to them? And then I met this lady who sort of made me very happy. And she said, well, you know, I've got this little wireless thermostat thing, and I just, you need a degree to operate it. It's nonsense. So when I want to turn the heating up, I put it in the fridge. This is how a thermostat works. Okay. And it isn't just about heating. Well, I'm, you know, picking on that because I've spent a lot of time on it in the last year. But it's also, we also hear this kind of stuff, this sort of weird, irrational behaviours people have around things like security as well. So London, there's a reasonably high burglary rate. Lots of people are worried about being broken into. You know, lots of people have burglar alarms. Lots of people don't use them. They say things like, oh, well, you know, I'm only going out for a few hours. I'm not going to bother. It takes you about 10 minutes for somebody to get into your house and, you know, and nick the things that they want to nick. So this isn't rational. What this is actually covering up is things like, I'm worried my kids are going to come home drunk and forget how to unset it, and it's going to be a pain, or it's just, you know, but it's some of the reasons people have underpinning this are actually quite rational, but, you know, some of it is just like, oh, it doesn't seem worth it, doesn't it? They're only going to the shops. And the engineers I work with kind of have a bit of trouble with this, because they're like, but we've given them a system that does the thing that they want. You know, why are they not doing it? And he's like, well, you know, hey, it's basically a bit too rigid. Now, when I give this talk, I've been asked, one thing that comes up quite a lot is people say, well, you know, yeah, great, you've stood up and ranted about it, and what are you actually doing about it? I thought I was not going to have time to talk about some of that. So I haven't, there is a longer version of this talk where I try to go into that a bit more, and I will tweet the link so anybody can have a look at it, anybody wants to can have a look at it. I really wanted to kind of sum up today just with a few design principles based on what we've already talked about, which is really, you know, remember that people's day-to-day lives can't be programmed. Most people don't want to program them, even if they can. You know, remember it's a home, not a domestic computer. You're going to be providing people with new types of information and new types of control. Don't start any arguments. Remember that people have almost always got something much more important to do than fiddling around with a bit of technology. So as far as you can, don't demand their attention unless you need it. If you're doing something boring, like heating, you know, you don't have to deliberately make it boring, but don't try to make it demand too much attention. And finally, don't assume people already know how to use a system that you're replacing. They will use it wrong. They will have broken mental models. You either have to help them form better ones, or you have to be forgiving when they don't do what you're expecting them to do. And I'd like to wrap up with one brilliant quote I got from some of the academic research I've been reading, which is that people don't want more control of their homes. They want more control of their lives. And I think a lot of the systems that we've seen to date have not really been acknowledging this.